They told me I couldn't build on the podium, and I took that personally. Ladies, gentlemen, and miniatures of all ages, today we're going to talk all about bases in the beginning of Early Access for Grounded 2. In this video, we'll be going over generally good base function practices, some general base building tips and tricks, some of the underutilized functions of certain base tools, and then of course we will also have some specific awesome base locations as well. Disclaimer at the start then, I will be showing off a lot of this stuff in creative mode, but the information and locations are specifically intended to be applicable to survival. I'm just using creative for ease of actually showing it to you guys. First things first then, basic tips. When it comes to building bases in this game, there are a few things you want to consider. Especially early game, you want your main base to be close to important resources that you will need a lot of. So being close to the ground by like grass or a water source is not a bad idea at all. But this also means being very easily accessible to any and all insects that are around. The best really early spot for a base, like literal start of the game, is the first ranger station. Dangerous insects never really come past here. It has lots of low tier resources nearby. It's a really simple one, but the second that you start to want to move to the next stage is where you have more considerations. First, when putting your base together, storage is key, even while building. If you are building with grass planks or with weed stems, you want to make sure that you make some pallets so that you can go out and gather a bunch of these items. Then do the actual building in bursts rather than just going on one trip at a time, gathering things and then building and then going out again to gather things and building. It's much more efficient to just gather a bunch of stuff and then build a bunch of stuff. But then also, once you have your base, make loads and loads of storage for items and materials in general. Nothing will irritate you more long term in this game than not having enough storage space, or organized storage space at least, so make lots of boxes. Even the early baskets you can make quite cheaply, and try to keep them so you only put certain materials in certain places to keep it nice and tidy long term. Next up, a relatively simple one is third-person mode. You can enter this in the pause menu at any point, or you can just press U if you're on keyboard and mouse, and I just find it about 10 times easier to do the actual building stuff in third person rather than first person. It gives me a better sense of scale, it helps with the movement required at points as well, and on a similar note, there is the handy gnat function, but this only exists in creative mode right now. It's honestly quite buggy right now, as in glitchy, obviously there's a bug, but you can't actually open the build menu on the handy gnat, so it doesn't really work for its main function. It's basically just a flying camera right now, and even then it can end up breaking your game in ways that forces you to reload saves. So that to say, right now at early access start, the handy gnat is not very helpful, even in creative, which is where it's meant for, but it will be a really useful tool in creative once it is fixed to make larger structures without as much of a hassle. But again, as I showed with the podium, anything can be done with just your player if you really put your mind to it. That said, a simple sentiment: Rome wasn't built in a day, and your base doesn't need to be either. It doesn't help you to make yourself focus on building the base all in one go. It makes a lot more sense to get a functional starting setup going than just slowly expand and gather materials as you're exploring in general, and grow your base and adjust it to fit your needs and desires as they change while you progress through the game. You never know when you'll want to just change where your base is, when you'll find a new location that you like more, so don't overcommit until you really like a spot. Past that, before we get into the actual base locations and stuff like that, I do want to shout out a few underutilized base functions. If you are meticulous, you will be crafting everything, but for those who just craft the absolute minimal amount they need to function in the world, you should know that the grinder can generate loads and loads of plant fiber through higher tier materials, the grow patch lets you grow tons of useful things depending on what you plant into it to begin with, and the spinning wheel not only lets you make these silk ropes, but also lets you produce crude rope at a rate of 1 plant fiber per rope, which is 1/3 of the price of doing it manually the normal way, at the cost of course, having to wait for them to actually make it. All of these things are great individually, and most people will just make one of them and be happy if they make any at all, but a thing that a lot of people don't really think about is that you can make multiple of anything. You can have 5 grinders all grinding at the same time, you can have 5 grow patches all growing at the same time, you can have 5 spinning wheels all spinning at the same time. The initial material cost to create them is obviously much more of a task to do, it's literally multiplying the amount that you need, but this increases your production efficiency of the things they create dramatically. And again, Rome wasn't built in a day. You don't have to build 5 at once, you can just start off with 1 of each. But then when you see where your material bottlenecks are, build more of what you need. Things like dew catchers, as an example, having multiple of them just means that you will barely ever have to worry about water again, and having multiple is especially good in multiplayer. And then just a simple little aesthetic tip as well, the angle that you get to look at the world while you are sleeping is directly corresponding to how you place your bed. So if you want a nice aesthetic view when you're sleeping, rotate and position your bed to make that happen. That said, let's move on to base locations, but starting with general location advice, rather than me just straight up telling you where I think you should build. Verticality is a really big deal when you are building in Grounded 2 for a number of reasons. First, aesthetics. Having a nice high-up house looks good from a distance, and it also gives you a nice view from inside at the outside world. But also, there are multiple practical reasons. First, it limits what can attack you within your base. If you are in a place that things like spiders and scorpions cannot access because they just cannot get up high enough, then your base is essentially immune to those insects. Of course, flying insects still exist, and they will be flying regardless. They can get to you no matter where you put your base, unless it's somehow like literally glitched under the ground, but they tend to stick to relatively specific areas, and you can just avoid building bases near them as a result. And then of course, you also have a nice high vantage point to look out at the land around you, see what you want to do next, plan what you're going to do, see what insects are around or what plants have respawned, stuff like that. To mix with the tip of verticality itself, you want to work with the park. You want to use the park within your house. Sure, you could just build like an 8x8 square grass house with 20 floors that goes straight up, but not only is that generally a lot more effort to reach that height than you would need to do if you actually use the map to your advantage, but it will also look pretty doo-doo. Let's be real. The game has a very carefully crafted layout in the park, and this means there are some places that just work better than others to build on. Of course, you should build wherever your heart tells you is a nice place. I don't want to limit you by any means, but you can really take advantage of the way the map is made. A lot of the more man-made structures like the podium and the picnic table can offer a ton of height, but they are listed as unsupported or invalid areas to actually build stuff on top of. But technically speaking, any outdoor area in Grounded 2 is buildable if you really want it to be, with the podium being my example here. Every single part of this structure is not technically supported by the podium. You cannot build directly onto the podium itself. It does not exist as far as like a structure, and so this is an entire walkway and staircase that takes you the entire way up the podium, and it is supported by one singular wall at the very bottom connecting to the dirt, the ground. And because of this, I could now then build an actual base all the way up on top of the podium if I wanted to. Ideally, you want more than one wall holding up the whole thing, honestly, but this is to show you that this is entirely possible to do, and it's how you build in places that are otherwise not supposed to be allowed. That said, there is also an argument for too much verticality, for sure, as you still want your base to be relatively easy to access for you, yourself, as at least at this stage of Grounded 2's early access, we do not have zip lines, so getting vertical height is not as easy as it was in Grounded 1, and while we do have buggies, none of them can currently fly, though I'm really hoping that we do get a flying buggy at some point. That said, the top of the podium, while a fun concept, isn't really viable as a main base if you're looking for something actually functional, but I've got something for you later if you do like the podium in general. That said, the next major important thing to consider is how central your base is. At least as far as the map that we have right now, the exact center is technically somewhere around here, which means a base located in this general area is pretty much equally close or far to everything, making it a really good main base place if you find a good spot within this area that you like the idea of. That said, you can have multiple bases, and I do generally recommend having some sort of minor outposts a bit further out on the extremities of the map as you explore and progress further. And hey, if you want your main base to be really off to the side, there's nothing wrong with that. You should probably just build something like a resource station in the middle here, so you can set a respawn here too sometimes and leave some chests and stuff like a smoothie station or stuff like that for when you need it. But then you can go home to your real personal desired base far off to the side when it's time to sleep at night. There's nothing wrong with either choice, but it is something to think about. All that said, now it's time to talk about specific locations, and I've got 3 that I really want to talk about and a 4th one that I will mention for much later in the game. The first one is super out of the way, but I think it's a really nice one. It's where Josh and I specifically spent a lot of time building in our pro and noob playthrough, which is going to be the big tree to the southwest side of the map. This denies centrality. It is very far away from almost everything, but it does 2 things incredibly well. First is verticality. There are mushrooms all along the side of the trunk of this tree, and while the tree itself does not count as a supported building area, the mushrooms do. So without even any crazy building shenanigans, you can just place a floor straight down onto a mushroom and then expand the building outwards. This route leading up the tree that we have here is perfectly climbable while you're riding a buggy. It's a little bit awkward when you're on foot, but that's why we have our actual ant nest down at the bottom, so you can always have the buggy with you when you're going up. This base is immune to any assault from ground creatures, and while there are butterflies that are near the area, they are not aggressive unless you get way closer than this base is. This is the safest, convenient to enter base that I've had, because usually the safer a base is, the harder it is to enter unless you build like a massive staircase. I've had entire defense sub-missions pop up that get completely defeated just because they are incapable of reaching this base while we're sitting inside of it. Also, you have a fun caterpillar friend who hangs out by the front door, or a repeatedly farmable caterpillar that always respawns in the same place, whichever way you want to look at it. That said, there are a couple more places I've scouted out as well after wandering around the map to find some nice spots. There are plenty of wide flat spots on the map that do work well as a blank canvas, but oftentimes these are also home to some nasty creatures. Again, you can build anywhere you like in the game with a little bit of ingenuity, but these next recommendations are mostly based off of the rules I laid out earlier, which is verticality within reason and being central on the map. That said, the absolute best for that, in my opinion, is these little stumps here that you can see on your map connected by a rope. This is sort of between the picnic table and the sort of central area of the park, and if you zoom in, you can see that there's actually a lot of these stumps. Some of them are really nice and central on the map, some of them are a bit further off, some of them have even fallen over and are actually horizontal instead of vertical spaces. These stumps count as buildable surfaces on the top, not on the sides, but on the top, so you don't have to do any fancy shenanigans to start a base if you can get up there. You just have to reach the top in the first place. This stump right here is my personal favorite one. It is extremely central, and there's a nice path that you can climb to begin with just by going up some plants on your buggy relatively easily. This path may look a little bit complex, but once you've done it a couple of times, it becomes really easy, real good muscle memory. And of course, if you don't want to parkour up here long term, you can always just build an easier way up, such as stairs or even ladders, which you can make on your base and grounded too as well. The other stumps are also valid choices, but usually a little bit harder to work with. That said, there is this stump right here, which is the easiest one to actually get on top of, as there is a rope that you can use to get right on from this rock. Either jumping onto the rope with a buggy, or just a single staircase can let you get up to the rope very easily on foot, and you can even build on the rock itself if you wanted one a little bit lower. But as opposed to the previous stump that was straight and unoccupied, this one over here is on an angle, which does mean you'll have to do some creative building to get a flat surface, and there also seems to be a butterfly that loves this stump too. So you will have an occasional foe who will fight you for this location, or alternatively, if you follow that same rope that we got onto the other direction, there is a flatter stump that doesn't have a butterfly, but this does have some plants that are somewhat in the way too, so either way you do have to deal with some sort of inconvenience. Then we have a much later game location, I would say. It's this street lamp, which is also by the roped stumps. The lamp itself has multiple spiderweb paths, which are only really particularly easily crossed when you have the Orb Weaver buggy, which is a very late unlock in the current early access build, so before you have that, these stumps are pretty much equally as good as the others, but they are harder to get to. Once you do have an Orb Weaver buggy, these stumps become much more friendly to access, and actually just basically have a path that leads you right up to them nice and easily. The bonus here as well is that the street lamp provides a lot of light at nighttime on top of that, so basically this just becomes a nice stump once you can get to it. Then of course, for the sake of bringing it up, you can of course build a base on the podium, but unlike what I showed earlier, which was purposefully just insanity, building the entire way up so you can have a base on top, the smarter thing to do is just use the side of the podium as a wall for your base, basically. Build up a few levels for some safety in the verticality, and then just build sideways out of the podium, almost like a treehouse. This is an extremely central location on the map, especially for the things that you actually want to do. It gives you an easy bit of verticality that you can change as you like as well, because you can make it higher or lower depending on your personal preferences. You have full control over how you build your way up here, and while it does look a little bit funky for sure, I think it sort of works even better for larger bases than the stumps do that we talked about before, because you can build the entire way around the podium, sort of using it like a central pillar, using the entire space however you want. And I really personally do like this as a main base location once you've gotten past the initial faff of building up a little bit to get that initial verticality. That just about does it for today, then everyone. Your early access base building guide with tips and tricks for your base, good fundamentals for where to choose your base locations, and then a few ideas of specific spots that should work extremely well if you do choose to build there. But again, I don't want to limit your creativity. If you think it would be fun to have a base somewhere, just do it and see what happens. The worst thing is that you can just recycle stuff and get the resources back. I hope you've all enjoyed this then, and if you have any more base building tips for your fellow Grounded 2 players, feel free to leave them in the comments down below. Like if you liked the video, subscribe to the notification bell for more, and most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, until next time, stay sweet. Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.